Alright, this is my first ever polymer clay cane. This is a really simple type of cane. It kind of gives like a cobblestone, abstract kind of effect. And the results from my poll were for blues and purples, so that's what I'm working on today. The more colors that you have for this technique, the better, because it will produce a more randomized kind of effect. So even though I just have blue and purple as my colors, I'm really trying to get different shades of these. And now I'm just trying to roll all of them into the same length, and as you can see, I already tried assembling it into a cane, but I didn't quite like it. I thought it needed one more color, so I added another shade of purple, and then I took apart my original assembly and I reassembled them, and I really liked how it was, so I went along with it. Then I started with reducing, so I just started squeezing it and then rolling it on my tile. Here I'm really trying to be aware of how I'm reducing my cane, because you don't want to end up distorting the pattern that you've created on the inside. Then I cut off my dead ends. I took a look at the pattern and I thought it needed a bit more reducing. Then with the help of my ruler, I cut my cane in half. I stuck the two pieces together and then cut that in half as well. And then I took the four pieces, stuck those together in a nice pattern that I liked, and then began reducing again. So at this point, I didn't really have a clear plan in mind about how I was going to reduce this cane, but ended up going with a square shape. I used my acrylic roller to help me out with this. I just rolled it on one side, flipped it 90 degrees, rolled it again, flipped it 90 degrees, and kept going with that so that I could maintain an even square shape along my whole cane. And then I cut off my dead ends again, and I was happy with how it looked, so I moved on to the next step. One of the tips that I learned was to place your cane in the freezer for a few minutes before you begin slicing. After working with the clay for so long, it gets really warm and soft, so chilling the cane helps you get nice clean cuts. Then I took those dead ends along with some scrap clay and mixed it all together so that I could have a base layer of clay to lay my slices on. Then it was time to fetch my cane out of the freezer and I could start slicing it. So before I did this, I actually cut it in half again and decided to pair those two together into a rectangle. I'm not quite sure why, but I guess that's what I did. I reduced it a little bit more, and then check out that pattern. I love how it turned out. So then I started slicing, and I quickly realized that I shouldn't slice a bunch before taking them off because they started to stick together. So I did little bits at a time. Then I started laying them on top of my base layer of clay, trying to make it as randomized as possible. I didn't really want the same colors touching each other. I ended up taking little pieces from some of the slices to fill in those small gaps. Then I used my acrylic roller to flatten it out a little bit, and then ran it through my pasta machine, starting on the 0 setting and gradually going down to number 3, which is what I use for my earrings, because I'm turning this slab into earrings. So I picked some really fun shapes for this one. I did some plain old circles and rectangles, but I also did some arches, some teardrop shapes, and this really weird like blob shape. I have no idea, but it was really fun to just play around and see what I could come up with. then once all my pieces were cut out, I could peel off the excess clay, and it was so satisfying. Then, once I had transferred all of my pieces onto the other tile, I smoothed out the rough edges, and then it was time for these babies to go in the oven. So while those were baking, I decided I would play around with the other half of my cane that I didn't end up using. So I reduced it a little bit more and then cut it in half and stuck those two pieces together to make a square. I reduced it a little bit more. I was just playing around, seeing if I could get a more detailed pattern by reducing it more, and I ended up really liking the result. So I sliced up my cane and laid it out on my slab. This time I was a little bit more strategic with my placement, trying to get a little bit of a pattern going. So then I cut off the excess clay, rolled it out a little, and then ran it through my pasta machine on 0 and then 1, because I'm going to turn this slab into some magnets. So I grabbed my triangle, square, circle, hexagon, and octagon cutters, and just started cutting out my shapes. Then I got to take my earring pieces out of the oven, and I am so happy with how they turned out. So after all of the sanding and drilling and assembly, this is what the finished earrings look like. I am really happy with how they turned out. They are all available in my Etsy shop for purchase.